Hi everyone. In this PowerPoint series and recordings, we're going to learn how to take a client's hypothetical set of facts and an existing case law and learn how to build and draft a full IRAC paragraph from one issue. You'll see that through each of these slides, we're going to break down how to do the issue sentence, the rule sentence, the analysis, and the conclusion. And then the final slide here actually has the full IRAC paragraph written out in paragraph form. But throughout each page here, we're going to take it piece by piece. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use Bob and the burglary example, the burglary statute, and one of the three cases that I've posted here on the Blackboard website, and that is Commonwealth versus Correa. So if you haven't done so already, before we watch this PowerPoint, I'd like you to do something. And even if you want to watch the PowerPoint through, I'm still requiring and asking that you go back through and read the documents, because just listening to the PowerPoint isn't going to be enough. So what you should have in front of you, and ideally already read, is the full Bob and the burglary story, which is posted under Blackboard for you. So it's like about a page or a page and a half of Bob's story about going to the Danvers Executive Lodge. In that document, there's also an excerpt of the Massachusetts burglary statute. So you can read the story about Bob, and then you have a short statute. And the big issue that we're going to be working on between now and throughout this assignment is trying to figure out if we think Bob committed the crime of burglary. So to do that, we're also going to be looking at three different cases. For now, for the purposes of this PowerPoint, you only need to read one of the three. And the one of the three that you need to have read is Commonwealth versus Correa. But I'm actually going to point something out. If you've read the full decision, which again, I encourage you to do, you'll notice that some of the issues raised in the Correa case are not going to be as pertinent to the issues we need. So we'll talk about how to pay attention mostly to part of the case as we go forward. But let me just repeat, what you need to have read already and have in front of you is Bob and the burglary fact pattern with the statute and the case of Commonwealth versus Correa. So if you haven't done that already, pause the video and go read just those two documents and then come back. And if you've already done them, then great. You're ready to jump in to building your first IRAC. So what we're going to do step by step here is you're going to, as I said, write your own IRAC paragraph. But really, I'm going to do it for you with this PowerPoint. And the end result is that we will have a full IRAC paragraph written at the end of this PowerPoint presentation. What we're going to learn how to do is to follow the IRAC structure with issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion. But that's also going to have us jump in and actually do the hard work. So we're going to learn how to read a case and find that rule of law that we talked about earlier, the part that goes in the R, the rule of law. And we're going to learn how to take the rule of law, understand how that rule of law was applied in the case precedent, in your cited case, and then we're going to learn how to apply that to our client's existing facts, and then make a prediction as to whether we think Bob satisfies the elements of burglary or not. So that's kind of the goal here, is we're going to get to a full IRAC paragraph at the end, but we're also going to understand how we got there step by step. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is read the fact pattern, as I mentioned. So again, if you haven't done that already, you need to have done that. And here's why. Every client that you meet, that you work with, that you experience, has come to you for legal assistance because they have a story. And we already know that because we've been talking about case briefing throughout legal research classes. And we learn from doing our case briefs that every case begins with a story, begins with those clients' facts and the events that gave rise to that legal dispute. So again, it might be someone going to a grocery store and slipping on a banana peel. It might be somebody not getting a promotion at work or not being hired and want to sue their employer. It could be facts that I order, let's say a new living room set of furniture to my house and it arrives, but it arrives damaged. What can I do about that? It could be a criminal set of facts like we have in the Bob and the Danvers Executive Lodge case. In any event, the most important step first is to just become familiar with our client's story. Because as we'll see throughout building legal analysis, the facts of what happened to our client help dictate and predict what that client's outcome is going to be. So if you haven't done it already, stop here and read the Bob fact pattern so that we can have a discussion about what happened to Bob. What did he do? Where did he go? What were his actions? And be able to be really familiar with his particular story. Okay, ready to move on to step number 2? I am. Okay, so step number 2. Oh, hold on. We can't see I cut it off on the page. Let me see if I can fix this. Okay, sorry about that short disruption. The PowerPoint was cut off by the screen. Okay, we've done step number 1. That is becoming familiar with our client's facts. Step number 2 is researching the law that helps predict the outcome for our client. Now, I've already done this step for us because for now, I really want the focus to be on the writing and the structure of the writing. As we move through our classes in legal research and writing, you will be assigned what we call open research, where you will do the research on your own and then do the step. But I've taken the liberty of doing that step for you here in the interest of time, because that way we can get to the writing portion. So here's the statute that applies here. It's one of several burglary statutes in Massachusetts. Longer story as to why there are so many burglary statutes. But the one that we are applying here says as follows, and again, you can pause and read it. But whoever breaks and enters a dwelling house in the nighttime with the intent to commit a felony shall be punished. So what I'd like you to do now is pause the video, and I want you to ask yourself, I want you to read just those first 2 lines and say to yourself, if you were to try to prove, and the prosecution would try to prove, that Bob committed burglary, what are the checklist of actions that Bob would have had to have done for this to be burglary under a Massachusetts statute? Another way of saying that is, what are the elements of this statute? So again, imagine you're the prosecution and you're trying to prove that Bob committed burglary. What here is in your checklist? Did you have a chance to come up with the checklist? If so, we can move on to the next slide. And here is the checklist of elements from burglary. How did we find that? Well, we looked at the language here, and it says whoever breaks and enters. So we need a breaking and we need an entering. These are an and, not an or. Must be of a dwelling house. So there's a third element. In the nighttime, must be in the nighttime, and the person must have the intent to commit a felony. So really, we can break this down to 5 elements. In order for the prosecution to prove that Bob committed burglary, they would need to prove that there was a breaking, there was an entering. This breaking and entering was of a structure that can be called a dwelling. It took place during the nighttime, and Bob had the intent to commit a felony. And if each one of these elements is proven, in a criminal case, it would be beyond a reasonable doubt, then the prosecution can prove, and a jury can find that Bob committed burglary. But now let's take a bigger step back. Let's look from above. What we're really asking here is what I just said. Did Bob commit burglary? I'm going to put my arms up for a second. We call that the big issue. The ultimate issue we want to decide is whether Bob committed burglary. But in order to do this with thorough legal analysis, relying on case precedent and applying that precedent to our client, we need to break down that big issue of burglary into the sub-issues you see here. Sub-issues being the various elements of this particular crime. Big issue is burglary. But in order to prove the big issue of burglary, the prosecution would first need to prove that there was a breaking, and that is its own standalone mini issue. And then second, the prosecution would need to prove an entering. Third, the prosecution would need to prove that this took place in a dwelling. Fourth, the prosecution would need to prove that this took place at nighttime. And finally, that there was an intent to commit a felony. And if each one of these elements independently can be satisfied, all of these mini issues, then the prosecution could conclude that yes, Bob has committed burglary. This little exercise that we stopped and did here by looking at the burglary statute and breaking it down can be done for any legal issue. I'll give you an example that you're likely already familiar with because it's the one from our textbook involving Sack and Shop. In Sack and Shop, The main issue is whether the grocery store is going to be liable in negligence for the slip and fall when Harris slipped and fell on the banana peel and hurt herself. Negligence has a 4-part checklist. First, a plaintiff must prove a duty of care. Second, a breach of the duty of care. Third, causation. And last, harm. So all statutes, all legal issues can be broken down into various elements like this. And that's really critical, because what we're going to do from here through the end of the burglary assignment is we're going to answer whether we think Bob committed a burglary. But to do that, we're going to do separate IRAC analysis for each one of these. We can't do it all lumped together because we need a rule of law about each one of these, don't we? We need a rule of law about what breaking is. We need a rule of law on entering and dwelling and so forth. And the same it's not going to be the same rule of law of each. That doesn't make sense. And to that point, it's not even necessarily going to be the same cases. You might need one case to help us define dwelling, but an entirely different case precedent to help us define entering. Sometimes we get lucky and one case can be instructive on more than one issue, but that's not always the case. So I'll just state it again. What we're going to do to analyze and conclude the big issue of whether Bob committed the crime of burglary is we're going to do a mini analysis, an IRAC, for each one of these elements. Now, before we get completely overwhelmed, I will make this a little easier. We are actually not in class going to analyze the issue of nighttime or intent to commit a felony. We're just going to assume these two are present just because we only have so much time and a 5-paragraph IRAC analysis is very lengthy. So what we're going to do together is we're going to work on dwelling together in this PowerPoint. This PowerPoint and the couple of recordings that go with it, we're going to build an IRAC just on this one sub-issue of dwelling. Then, together in class, we're going to work on the breaking, and for homework, you are going to do your own IRAC on entering. And I'll walk you through the steps of how that will work. And at the end of this unit, you will end up with 3 discrete paragraphs, each an IRAC paragraph, one for the sub-issue for dwelling, one for the sub-issue of breaking, and one for the sub-issue of entering. All right, are we ready to tackle dwelling? Let's just jump right to element number 3, just because that's the one that I like to discuss in class. And I also see that we're nearing, not quite there, but we're nearing the end of the first 15 minutes of this. So I'm just going to stop this video here. And when we pick up on video number 2, we're going to start with reading the Commonwealth versus Correa case and moving on from there. So again, if you haven't done that already, make sure you read Correa before we move on to the next step.